To the front of the net. Puck work to the outside to Eklund. Howe back to Eklund again. Kerr sparring with Stevens in front. Eklund creeps behind. Out in front to Kerr. He scores! Tim Kerr and the Flyers are perfect on 5-on-3s. They are 3 for 3. Get their first power play goal of the night and tie the game.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast. Before we get started, just wanted to remind you that we are brought to you by Jim South Street, down on 400 South Street, 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries you'd ever want in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. So check them out at 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And now to our show. We are back. It is your host, Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast episode number 266, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com, Summit Adjusters, Jim South Street, and featured now on the exciting new forum website, Hockey Hot Stove. And we are streaming tonight live on X and on Facebook. And coming soon to a theater near you, YouTube. Stay tuned. Follow us at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck for updates when we'll complete that transformation. So there's a lot to talk about right now. We have some breaking news, but let's go to the panel first. Chef B, why don't you give us some opening thoughts for tonight?
All the business is done, it looks like. So Danny got everything a lot more accomplished than I think a lot of people thought. I'm sure we'll delve into that. And Cam York is signed. I was glad about that because you don't give up on a 24, 25-year-old defenseman that you've grown internally. But either way, I know we're going to get to it, so I don't want to hold it up. Get to the other guys.
You got it. The great Dan Silver weighing in.
It's so nice to have a GM that's like the opposite of Chuck Fletcher. Fletcher handing out bad contracts and not getting creative with trades. And Briere, since he came in, just has been the complete opposite. The trades from the beginning, the Provorov trade, the Zegras trade, really creative with those trades, patient. And then the signings this summer, I just thought all the RFA signings were great. The York signing, maybe the best of the bunch from a term and a dollar amount perspective. So it's nice having a GM that at least I have a lot of confidence in. So that's exciting.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So joining us tonight from 97.3 ESPN, Sports Talk Philly, and of course a co-host with the YWT You Would Think podcast. He's back with us after a little bit of settling in. Kevin Durso. Kevin, thanks for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. My pleasure, guys. Great to be back with you.
You got it. So the breaking news I referred to earlier is actually broke very early this morning with Cam York signing a $5.15 million contract. It appears to be more of a team-friendly deal. There was a lot of thought behind how you come up to that opinion. And the Flyers were pretty busy making conservative moves during free agency. And Kevin, I guess, wanted to get your opening thoughts about what the Flyers did over the last week.
Yeah, over the last week in particular. So I guess I'll try to go in reverse order here. I'll start with the Cam York deal from today, just because, I'll admit I'm surprised by the term. I thought it was going to be something shorter term than this. I kind of had my sights set on the 3-year range. I kind of thought that's what York wanted. So I'm surprised by the term, but I like it. I think it's a good vote of confidence from Danny Briere to Cam York to say, you're part of this solution going forward. You're going to be part of this core as well. They never really shied away from it. It's not like they let, you think about that release that came out. I think it was the day that John Tortorella got fired, that they kind of included this, here's our group of core guys. And you saw who was in it, and York was part of that. And they've kind of now firmly made their bet on him as well. So I got the sense it was going to be a bridge deal, but I like the commitment. I think the 5-year term is a big commitment on York's part. I would have thought for sure the cap hit you were looking at, especially the longer you went in the deal, was going to be at least $6 million. I kept that Travis Sanheim 6.25 number in mind. That was really where I thought they were going to have to get to really make it. And to be honest, since York was the last thing that was done, I wasn't sure how they were going to get to that number with everything else they had done. Now that we see the final number, I think it all makes a lot of sense that they knew what was going to work. I think getting a 5-year, $5.15 million AAV is really well done. You now kind of know what you've got with this group for at least one, for at least the next 2 seasons with several players. Sanheim, York, Sealer, Ristolainen, all under contract going through that point. And, unless Drysdale knocks it out of the park this year, his next deal is probably going to be in a relatively similar range. So you're not going to have those guys that are on defense that are making $9.5-10 million just because the cap's going up and not you don't have a true number one defenseman out of this either per se, but you've got some solid 2 to 5 material in all of these guys. And so now you're kind of just looking for that next step. So I think that I just think this is really well done. It's really well done to get this done the way that they did. No trade protection. So you kind of have both options on the table. York's either a long-term piece of the future or he's a tradable asset later on if it comes to that. You hope not, but that's what it is. So I look at that. The other deals over the course of the week, there were a couple of overpays in my mind, but the term was all manageable. You didn't see anything where they went out and threw 5 years at somebody on the free agent market just because. They, 1-year deals for just about for everybody except for Dan Vladar. I kind of, personally, I saw a lot of people kind of bashing the Vladar signing. He's better than what you had last year in that role. And I think that the numbers don't reflect his total game. I'm not saying he's a number one by any stretch, but I think he's a much more suitable backup to Sam Ersson, can at least give you somebody that you can utilize. I think Dvorak could be a good fit. I didn't love the $5.4 million, but also kind of understanding that I think that's what they needed to get to. I think you're probably looking at a deal where his AAV was probably a lot closer to $4 million if you go to a second year. I think the 1-year deal is what forced it above the 5 and got it there. And the defensemen that they signed are kind of just, they're depth pieces. They're there to be what they are, especially with the idea that Ristolainen's going to start on the shelf probably for a little while. It goes the same way with the forward depth that you're trying to acquire as well. When you think about the now the possibility the Forster's on the shelf at the start of the year as well. You got to find out where you're going to fit those pieces in. And I just think it's really impressive how they've kind of come away from all of these pieces. I kind of thought that the York thing needed to get done first so they could set the table for free agency. They did it the other way and still have the ability to make those additions internally to fill out the roster going forward. So I think it's business well done for the next year. At least it sets you up for what's to come. And now they just have to maximize what they're able to do going forward because they're going to have a lot more money on the books, off of the books next year available to them. And that's where they can really make their impact on this rebuild.
Mm-hmm. Chef?
Well, I was wondering if the whole panel here, getting Cam York on that deal that we got in like 2-3 years in this rising cap world. One, does everybody agree that if he goes back to his form from 2 years ago, which, I do believe he's capable of doing that. If he gets there, one, I think this is going to be a great deal monetary wise. It gave him stability and it gave the Flyers a good dollar budget for the future. And in this rising cap world in 2 years, when the cap's over 110 million or whatever, I think they're going to go back and look at this as, oh, wow, he really, as opposed to the deals we've been handed to by previous, GMs in the past here with Fletcher, you get stuck, hopefully, the Coots one will be a little bit more bearable as the cap goes up too. And maybe he comes back under, in a different system with a different coach. I think that one's going to age a little bit better too. Do you see anything on this now with the group that they have signed that do you think that any of these signings were either bad or not in the best interest of the team or anything along those lines?
So no, I don't think that any of the signings were bad or in the worst interest of the team. As Kevin said, the term on the UFAs that they signed, Dvorak, Vladar, I think the terms on those were the reason why it was fine, because you look at it, the Dvorak deal is just 1 year, right? That's fine. We can move him at the trade deadline for maybe, if he plays well, for a 3rd round pick or something like that, right? For a team that needs good center depth. Vladar, as Kevin mentioned, and I've had him on my fantasy team for a while now, so I've actually followed his career. I think that he could potentially be a number 1 goalie. Like, he's never really had that shot. He was in a tandem with Jeremy Swayman in Boston, and both of those guys were kind of getting equal time, and they were going to the guy who was hot. Then he goes to Calgary, and Dustin Wolf was the hot new rookie goalie. So again, he was kind of pushed to the side a little bit. I think there's some untapped potential with Vladar, and worst case scenario, you've got him on a 2-year deal. By the time that deal is up, you would hope that Zavragin would be coming over here from Russia, right? So, or Carson Bjarnason potentially develops into a number 1 goalie. So at that point, or Urson could still take a step forward. So that one is fine. The thing with Cam York that's interesting to me is he's a guy who I always thought had the potential to be the power play quarterback on the number 1 unit, but he didn't get the chance last year to show that. And I had kind of 2 theories for why that was. I mean, one was, and I don't think they look at it to this level, but with the contract coming up, you don't necessarily want him to put up a lot of points. So I thought maybe they were trying to control his points a little bit. The other thing, which we found out later in the year, is that him and John Tortorella did not get along whatsoever. So I think that there's no way that Tortorella was going to let him have a shot on that top power play unit. So we saw the Flyers trotting out guys like Egor Zamula and Rasmus Ristolainen as the number 1 power play quarterback D-men. Cam York is a much better power play QB than either of those guys. He was on the U.S. National Development Team number 1 unit with Trevor Zegras. So I kind of am interested to see if now Cam York gets an opportunity. I feel like it's going to be kind of between him and Jamie Drysdale to see who's going to be the power play quarterback on that top unit. And I'd like to see York get another shot. So I think he was never right after the hit he took in Washington. I was actually at that game. He got drilled into the boards. I couldn't tell if it was a concussion thing or a shoulder thing or a little bit of both. And after that, he never was right. I mean, he came back in 4 to 6 weeks after that, never really got his rhythm. Him and Tortorella were at, war with each other. So he's an intriguing guy. The one guy on the roster that I think it maybe could spell some trouble for is Emil Andre, because it does seem to me that they're making a distinct effort to get bigger. And I'm not sure that they're going to want to have York and Andre as 2 of your central figures on the left side of the defense. Now, I think Andre actually plays a lot bigger than York does, but he's a small guy. So I don't think that they're going to give up on Andre immediately. I thought he was really good at times last year, but that's the one where I see them sign him to 5 years, and I'm like, where's the fit for Andre? But we'll see. I mean, they're not particularly strong down the left side, especially if you're going to have Travis Sanheim playing on the right. Your top defenseman that you've drafted, Oliver Bonk, is on the right. So maybe there's a spot for Andre too. I just have the feeling that they're going to want to get a little bit bigger down that left side, especially after Nick Seeler leaves. So that'll be something to watch. But yeah, no, I thought all the deals were great. They don't hurt the team. And we'll get in a little bit later in the show. I did some of the math on kind of what they'll have available next summer, but it's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah, Kev, I just want to interject there. One of the things I've found with Cam York, he just can't get shots through. And when he does, he doesn't really have an impressive shot. I mean, that became a really big deal with this player. I thought he was given maybe not as much of an opportunity as he deserved, but he really hasn't shown much. I would expect that the slate is being wiped clean for pretty much everybody, as it should, with a new coaching staff, hopefully some better ideas on the power play. But there's a reason. I mean, I don't think, despite the personal animus that obviously existed between Tortorella and Cam York. If he was getting the job done, I don't think he would have sabotaged them really for any reason. I just don't think Cam York has shown enough offensively, and that's my one knock on the player. When he's at his best, he's very steady. He makes good decisions. He stands tall at the blue line. He's good in the neutral zone. But when it gets into the offensive zone, he just hasn't had that pop to that point where I don't think he's hit 30 points yet. So to me, he's got to break through that threshold. Maybe he's ready to do that. Defensemen come later. The deal is until he's 29 years old. So that's a very interesting choice of term. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, he had two seasons ago, he had 10 goals, 30 points, so he did get to the 30 right there. That was his career mark. That was what's interesting to me about that season is that, especially obviously considering that year he was much more on Tortorella's good side, obviously. The emphasis was always still about the defensive side of the game under Tortorella, and he improved on that, and it kind of fed into his offensive game a lot more. And you know, even if he's not getting a ton of power play time as a result of that, you know, just by choice, it seemed, you still saw that impact and how it kind of shifted over to that. I'm all about, especially when I look at some of the deals, like I looked at this with Noah Cates' deal, with Tyson Forrester's deal, and unfortunately it doesn't seem like Forrester's going to have as much of a chance to do this upcoming season as we thought. But I always look at what's your marker and how can you take the next step? So that's York's marker. You were a 10 goal, 30 point defenseman one season. You got to get back to that area in some capacity to kind of warrant this at this point. And I'm not saying that means that's, you know, every 30 point defenseman is a $5 million defenseman. I think a lot of people look at the AAV of deals and think of it just to see the big numbers. You know, $5 million is $5 million. You know, I don't have $5 million. You guys don't have $5 million. That's, you know, so it's a big number to all of us. The thing that I can't complain about with this AAV is, you know, let's face it, this is almost on par with the deal that Cody Ceci got in LA. Cody Ceci got 4 years, $4.5 million AAV. And I think that a lot of people would look at the two players next to each other and go, yeah, I'd rather have the 24-year-old with more offensive upside than the 31-year-old defenseman who's stay at home and hasn't been overly effective over the last several years. You know, that's what kind of comes to my mind. So that's why I like the value of it. I hope the role is different for him. And I think it's great that we're bringing up the York Drysdale combination here on the blue line and on the power play potentially, because first, I think they need to be utilized that way. And then secondly, knowing the kind of camaraderie that those guys already have, the trio of Zegras, York, and Drysdale. Let's see what happens with them all together. Because for a little while this offseason, there was a lot of will they, won't they with trade talk with Cam York. Now that's been put to rest. He comes into next season knowing where he stands contract-wise. Hopefully early on knowing where he stands in terms of role, and hopefully it all comes to fruition the way that the Flyers want it to for a guy who obviously, you know, now several years back was drafted in the middle of the first round.
Yeah. Let's talk about the center position. You know, the thing is, the Flyers have improved down the middle. It's not, I would say it's more than marginal, because if you look at Zegras, and who I call it like a better version of Morgan Frost, because he's done it, right? And Dvorak is better than Ryan Poehling. He probably as good defensively. I don't think he skates quite as well, but he's not a slow skater. But he adds a little more offense, and it certainly was a high draft pick back in his draft year. So the Flyers were a little bit better in an important position. So, and plus you have the flexibility to put either Dvorak or maybe more likely Zegras on the wing if the face-offs, or you can get them on the same line to cover Zegras if he's struggling at the dot, but you like what he's doing otherwise. You have that kind of flexibility with guys that really can provide some offense, even though it's not great, especially in the case of Dvorak. Zegras, we're hoping to get back to a 60-point form. So,
yeah, I mean, the depth down the middle is solid. You know, what was interesting for me is, you know, Anthony DeMarco, friend of the show. He's working for Daily Faceoff now for Frank Saravalli. He put out a Flyers lineup, and he had Noah Cates on the wing. And I sent him a message on Twitter. I was like, really? You're going to put like probably our best center last year on the wing? I was just giving him, you know, a little bit of crap. But when you think about it, I mean, there's not a non-zero chance that Cates, who probably was our best overall center last year, could be okay, could be looking to play the wing. Like if you're going to have Couturier, Zegras, and Dvorak. Do you want to pay your fourth line center $5.4 million? I guess it doesn't really matter in the general scheme of things, right? And a lot of it's going to be matchup based. But if you really want to try Zegras down the middle and he fits, maybe having Cates as his winger could make sense. Or maybe it's Cates in the middle with, and Zegras, But he did make a good point that potentially having Cates on a line with Zegras could kind of offset some of that, lack of defensive awareness that Zegras may have. So
yeah, you want to introduce your cool cat, Dan? I'm going to interrupt you, but you got a really cool cat hopping around there. And since we're live streaming it, I think we need to identify this is really something. I mean, that's some gymnastics we just saw. I'm sorry for the audio version.
This is Conathan. We've always just been live streaming, or just audio. So yeah, I'm going to see her. Yeah, she jumps all over the place. She's a big Flyers fan, but yeah. So
big fan of Nadia Comaneci back in the day.
She lies on the Mitch Gobb pillow I've got in the background a lot, but they do have more options down the middle now. Of course, a lot of it will, left wing is going to be a little bit dicey, and I'm sure we'll get into what that could look like. But yeah, their center depth is. They don't have, you could argue they don't have a 1C and maybe not even a 2C unless Zegras kind of pops off or Couturier comes back to form. But, maybe they have 4 third-line centers on this team. I don't know. Could
be.
At worst, a couple of 2Cs maybe. So
yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't bet my 2C on it. But anyway.
I'll tell you somebody. By the way, who doesn't care how much his fourth line center makes, John Tortorella, because last year at different points his fourth line center was making $7.75 million.
Yeah, yeah. John never really cared about that stuff. But yeah, speaking for somebody who could be bumped up in the lineup, Alex Bump is looking to grab a spot, especially now that Tyson Foerster appears to have suffered an injury at the Worlds that turned into an infection, and that could keep him out depending on how quickly or not so quickly it heals up. So there might actually be 2 spots available on the left wing, and Alex Bump, regardless, though, could be a candidate for them. What did you see so far from this player? Like going back to the AHL playoffs and observing some of the video that you saw from development camp, interviews, so on and so forth, Kevin.
Yeah, and one thing I can tell you is I watched a lot of the playoffs for the Phantoms. I watched a lot of those games. And it was kind of he came out like nobody's business. He was just all over the place for those first handful of games. And then it kind of, as that series with Hershey progressed, it faded a little bit for him. We kind of saw that adjustment start to take place from, even for having the college experience that he had and being much closer to pro ready. And I think that's the message of the development camp for him is he's obviously more mature than a lot of the other guys that come into this thing. You're not in that 18-year-old group that just got drafted that still has a lot of work to do in the gym and things like that. You're much more built for the NHL at that point and built for pro hockey. So he's going to get every opportunity. I think that now that the Foerster news is out there, now that it's a very real thing that they've got to go into the season looking for somebody to fill that void. And it's got to be somebody who has some scoring touch to his game. It's got to be somebody who has the ability to actually play from an offensive mindset a little bit, because that Foerster had, second on the team in goals last year. You've got to find a way to try to at least temporarily replace that and hope for the best that everything that's going on with him doesn't take him out of play for months, and it's more maybe at worst a couple of weeks or something like that into the season. So while you wait to figure that out, it's good to see that there's somebody who looks more the part and looks close to being ready for that. I can understand this going either way. Like I kind of still need to see whether or not he does this with the rest of the big club being part of the picture and scrimmages with the big club and things like that. Once we get to September and see preseason, things like that, we'll get much more of a feel for whether or not Bump kind of fits in. I got to imagine, like, if Bump can have one of those preseasons like we've seen from guys who ultimately make the team out of camp, that you just know there's no doubt he belongs, then I think it'll happen. It's still, you're kind of still in that territory where it's easy to do in development camp when you're one of the older guys. And that's just the way that it goes. And once you put yourself with everybody else, and if you can still stand out in the way that he kind of did during a lot of that, then we'll see. But he's got a little bit of time before that too, to kind of work on some things to get even bigger too. So it's a good start for him. He looks like he's close to being ready to be part of the solution. It's just a matter of whether or not it looks like he can do it when put next to some of the guys who are veterans.
Mm-hmm. Chef, you have a question?
Yeah, I was thinking, what is it? Is it coming down to him and Gurbenkin? I mean, and does it? I mean, if you're going to hedge your bets, and maybe he starts 20 games down there and gets his in the NHL, and if he really lights it up, is that what you do? And you go with somebody that has a little more NHL experience with it. So for now, at least, I mean, I'm not saying, look, there's no reason to rush this. I mean, we all think that, I'm gathering, we all think that Danny's done a pretty good job so far. And I'll throw a chef reference in there for Jason Martinez too. You don't microwave the food because it tastes like crap, and I can attest to that. 40 years of the business, you don't microwave it. But for this case, it does it. I think it makes more sense to let Gurbenkin come in, and I think it's more so Gurbenkin's job to lose more than Bump, because I want to make sure that my future player that we've developed in the had gets the right process. And, we've always had a knock on not developing players right. So this is a chance for them to really go, okay, let's do this the right way.
Yeah, to me, I think that the reason why Bump's going to get talked about so much more now is because you're trying to look for a possible Forster replacement. If that wasn't the case, and you're talking about maybe one spot, and let's face it, we kind of all know whose spot it probably would be among a group of 12. It would be the Delorier spot. Then I think Gurbenkin's a much more natural fit there, and I could see that being the only decision. Being Gurbenkin gets that role, plays a perfect bottom six game, and Forster's in the top six, playing where exactly where you expect him to. I don't know if that's going to exactly be the case. Like, I can see Bump being on the third line left wing, but it feels like they have a way here to, based on everything we've seen now that the York deal's done. Technically, they're still carrying 3 goalies. We know they're going to carry 2. Fedotov's going down once the opportunity hits, once it's time to do that. And I don't see them carrying 8 defensemen either. Like, I just don't see them carrying both of those veteran guys they signed. I think it's one or the other. And that's where you're going to open up the roster spots to be able to carry 13 forwards in some capacity. So, it's just going to come down to whether or not, kind of come down to that. It's whether or not you feel like both guys earn the spots. If there's 2 spots available to be earned, maybe you just roll forward with Delorier for the time being because of it. There's so many things that have to be answered about that. And some of it has to do with those players answering the questions for them. I'm not going to award Gurbenkin the spot either, just because he's had some NHL time in Toronto, that means he's a given to make the roster either. But I definitely, for all the times that I've seen, I don't want to jump too far ahead of where we're going to go with this eventually when we get to some draft pick talk either. I'm certainly not ready to just throw Martone right into the conversation here when Gurbenkin was acquired at the deadline. I think that there's a big reason why he was acquired and why it was a player that they liked in that Lawton trade. And it has a lot to do with situations like this, that's a guy who could fit much more in a role than being a scoring guy. So I kind of look at that. I would not rule him out at all. I think he's got a great shot of being one of the finalists for a roster spot as well, just given that he comes in with a lot more experience than others.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let them show in camp that they, let them battle it out. And, Lehigh Valley is not Siberia. Once, if Alex Bump has to go to play for the Phantoms, it's easy enough to call him back if that's how it works out. Let camp settle that. Dan?
Yeah, I don't see much of a difference between Bump and Gurbenkin. I mean, Chef, if you look at it, Gurbenkin played 2 full seasons in the KHL. Bump played 2 full seasons in the NCAA. Now, obviously, the KHL is a better league, but they're both fairly tough leagues to play in. Gurbenkin's only played in 7 NHL games. I wouldn't necessarily call that, a whole lot of NHL experience. And Bump is very physically advanced. I mean, I think that they're both big guys. Bump almost plays like more of a kind of like an NHL ready type of style than Gurbankin. And from what I heard, it sounds like Bump was the real standout at development camp. So if I was setting the odds, I almost think that Bump has kind of a better shot to make it than Gurbankin. But as Kevin said, they may need two guys on the left wing. I mean, if Forster's not in there, you're looking at, if you're going to keep Michkov and Konechny and Brink on the right, then you've got Tippett and Delorier on the left. So you're going to need to fill a few spots. The Martone thing's really interesting. As Kevin mentioned, it sounds to me like he wants to play in the NHL this coming season. But yeah, when I was reading some draft profile stuff of him, a lot of people were talking about how bigger guys, sometimes, you especially bigger guys that are skilled, you kind of want to say to yourself, oh, this is a bigger player. He'll be able to transition to the NHL right away. But a lot of times those big skilled guys kind of need some time to figure things out. And it does sound like in development camp, he was okay, but not great. And the whole, it sounds like if he doesn't, they don't want him to go back to the OHL is what it sounds like. So if he doesn't make the Flyers, they want him to play in college. But the thing about that is that if you sign a NHL contract, you can't go to college. So the scenario that plays out there is probably something like he comes to training camp and he either makes the Flyers or he doesn't. And then he is sort of like a late enrollee at an NCAA program. And of course, the fun thing would be Gavin McKenna, who he's played on a line with before, just committed to Penn State. There have been rumors about Porter Martone at Penn State. So that's kind of like either he makes the NHL or maybe he goes and plays with Gavin McKenna, and then the Flyers win the lottery and we get McKenna and everyone's happy.
Yeah, I think if you're just talking about Martone, if you read the tea leaves with Brent Flair's comments when he talks about there's offers out there for him, that's not juniors. He's talking college. And when they talk about, was it Riley Armstrong talking about how his first few steps are actually pretty good. It's the acceleration that he struggles with, and they need more lower body strength. If you line it all up, I think the Flyers would like to see him play in the NCAA next year. What program that he probably has his choice, like you said, there's a lot of offers out there. And that's what I think the plan is for Martone right now. And maybe there'll be pushback from the player and the agent, but I think they have a pretty good relationship so far from what I see. Kevin, just a comment on that. And I want to just touch on one other thing on the pro side.
Yeah. And to me, I think Martone's going to be ready for this team for sure. Look, I'm giving him, for right now anyway, if he decides college is the best route for him, which I don't think would be a bad decision at all for him, then that's fine. If he wants to take a shot at it and comes into main training camp and looks more the part than he did now, because you get a couple extra months, you've gotten a taste of the facilities, you've gotten a little bit of a familiarity with everything, and you've met some people along the way, maybe he does impress enough to get in there, even if it's for the 9-game tryout. Even I would resist the temptation here. I think that it's very fair to look at the player and think he's graduated from the OHL level, but he's not quite NHL level yet. And what's the in between when you can't go straight into the AHL? It would be that. I would say it would be go to college and get 1 year in. And I think he's on this roster on opening night 26-27. I think he's on this roster, and I think you set it up for that so that you can really lean into. I mean, if looking at all of the signs that we have so far from Danny Briere and this plan that they've had within the rebuild, all of the signs about the 26 offseason being a big one, the amount of money they're going to have to be able to come into that year with at least the thought. Michkov's on the last year of the entry-level deal. Martone could be on the first year of his entry-level deal. Insert player here who gets drafted in the 26 draft, wherever it may be. You might be able to really dive in with whatever's there, whatever makes it to July 1st, to round out that roster and get pretty close to being a finished product because you have more money and you don't have to pour so much money into potentially depending on how good they can make it out of the 26th draft, potentially upwards of, like, you feel like Martone's just like Michkov to a degree, cornerstone level players here that could be potential top liners for you for a long time. And you don't have to pay them that much money in the very beginning of their career. So it allows you to maybe take those steps you want to, but I would resist the temptation here. And yeah, you know what? I'm going to write about this tomorrow, as a matter of fact, because the Gavin McKenna news is so fresh. Penn State's becoming a destination, and I would not be shocked at all between not only the connection, you know, now that McKenna is going to go to Penn State and be part of that program going forward, but Martone's got a few more maybe connections that he could lean on with Penn State. You know, Jackson Smith was another top prospect in the draft this year who's already committed, and he's got a teammate in Luke Misa, Michael Misa's brother, who is also committed to Penn State. You know, pretty much every highlight package I've watched of Porter Martone since the draft has a lot of plays with Luke Misa as part of it. And I wouldn't be shocked if that entices him, if the college decision is where they go with it, if that doesn't help his decision, if he's got an offer on the table from Penn State.
Yeah, Dan, let me get you in before I wanted to mention something. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I wonder with the sense is if there's going to be sensitivity with Porter Martone. He's clearly a player who, you know, he's got some confidence, he's got some swagger, he wants to be in the NHL. I gotta wonder if, you know, the name Cutter Gauthier is sort of in the thought process here for the Flyers front office. Like, man, we screwed up this Cutter Gauthier situation, and obviously, look, we don't know exactly what happened there, but they got to be mindful of, here's a kid who, you know, wants to play in the NHL. Now, he grew up as a Flyers fan, right? There's photos of him in a Flyers uniform when he was younger. Like, he's hit there. They did that cool photo thing where he was like 10 years old and had a Wayne Simmons photo. Like, it seems like he really wants to play on the Flyers, right? So I don't think it would ever sort of get to that same type of Cutter Gauthier thing. But I think they're going to want to be mindful if you've got a player who wants to play in the NHL. So they're going to probably have to treat it with glove hands a little bit. You know, hey, you come to training camp. Let's see what you got. Let's see how you do in preseason, and we'll go from there. You know, and if the Flyers are sort of hoping that he goes to college for a year, maybe they hope that maybe it becomes apparent that, you know, he's not ready for the speed of the NHL, right? But I think they're going to be a little mindful of what happened with Cutter Gauthier when dealing with him. That, you know, understanding that we don't know what's being said behind the scenes, so it may not be a concern at all, but just something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, don't forget too, he could still go. Let's just say, you know, he gets his wish and he goes to Penn State, and he can play there and still probably get 5 to 10 games, depending on how well Penn State does this year. And, you know, you get out there, you put on some more extra muscle because they have a very regimented program. The college guys, you go there and you get practices in, you get muscle training in, and all that stuff. So he could have, if he's sitting there thinking, and if they're both on you can always sell it. Hey, look, you can have both this year. You can be up with us. And then guess what, too? If the Phantoms make another run, and they got a new crew of guys that are going to be going down there, guess what? You can go there, too, even after the season's done, if we don't make the playoffs, and you could still get some time in with them. So there's a lot of hockey to be played after his college, even if they do well too at Penn State. So that you could sell it. That's the way I think I would be selling it. Especially if he's not keeping up with the big boys for right now, that's a definite good way to sell it.
Yeah. I think I'm not worried about the Gauthier thing with this kid. I just a different vibe. I think he's more grounded in like the big picture and his career and that thing. Gauthier had a certain attitude and certain expectations. I don't know. We'll see. But before we get into the prospects too deep, I just wanted to mention the Flyers made a decision to move on from one player and had the anticipation of acquiring another. And I'm talking about Jacob Pelletier, who they decided not to qualify. They moved on. He quickly signed an agreement with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And Maxim Shabanov, who was really the favorite to come to Philadelphia, a smallish, I guess, 5'8", 160, the highly skilled winger. who's about 24, who played in the KHL, and we think, oh wow, our power play's been so awful. At least, at the very least, he's going to come in and light that up. But he decides to start out with the Islanders. Kevin, what was the vibe about that?
Well, with Peltier, I just think that it goes into the size equation. And I know that Shabanov's not part of that equation. I think that would have been more of from a size perspective, a direct replacement. I just don't think they wanted that many guys. If you had qualified Peltier and we're going after Shabanov and you've got Bobby Brink and you've got a smattering of others that are not necessarily as small as those three, but are still under 6 foot, I think you were starting to trend in the wrong direction for everything else that you were doing, trying to move forward. All of the draft picks leading up to that, like we're waiting on the Shabanov news and where he's going to play. And everybody they're drafting is above 6'1", 6'2". Yeah. And you saw the type of free agents they were even looking at. The defensemen were big. Dvorak's a bigger guy. It all kind of added up, and it was like, okay, size is clearly an emphasis for this team going forward. And maybe they feel like if they also added Shabanov on top of it, there's the small skill guy that comes into the picture. I also kind of think that the Shabanov thing made a lot more sense, or the pursuit of him made a lot more sense when you find out what's going on with Tyson Forster. And you're talking about a guy who played on the left side. It looked, it was practically going to be a natural replacement in terms of at least maybe playing time. You could have put him in there, but that's the problem. If he's looking for straight up guarantee top 6, that's your role every single night. And you're only kind of here until Tyson Forster's back, and that's the end of that. Then maybe that's not the opportunity he's looking for. It's not really, I don't sit here and go over it's here or there, whether or not a guy signs with the team or not. What I think it would have done is made this a lot more fun. It would have been a lot more fun to watch with a guy who does some of the things that he does, but it just wasn't meant to be. And they move forward with it as a result. There's no guarantees. There was no guarantees it was going to work. It wasn't going to work. It was basically risk-free for the amount of money you were going to spend on it. So you take your shot at it. You hope for the best. It seemed like it was promising for the better part of a month, and then it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, it stung a little, but we've moved on. The Zegras acquisition definitely gave them some slack with the fan base, it would seem. So, gents, I want to move on to discuss some of the feedback we got from our last show, and the fans were not quiet. For people who might want to check out episode number 265, our buddy, the draft analyst, Steve Cornianos, was kind of, up and down, in and out with the Flyers draft. And Kevin, I think the point that he was making, and I wanted to get your feeling, because I don't think there's a right answer here. I just think it depends what you think of James Higgins as a prospect, where he'll be in 5 years versus Porter Martone, weighing that all in with the Flyers' need at center. And then did they overreact to not getting a center because they chose Martone and move up, maybe not as judiciously, to get Nesbitt? And how much do you like that player after you've looked at him? And maybe if you throw that all in a casserole in your mind and say, okay, how did you feel, your initial impressions about what they did in that first and second round, and do you feel the same way since?
Yeah, so for me, the first, at least with the 6th overall pick, there was one goal to me, and it was to come away with one of 4 players, and Higgins and Martone were both on that list. So to me, still mission accomplished. I would have added in Desnoyers and Frondel to that list. To me, if you would have been picking 6 and kind of felt like you wanted to take the leap on Jake O'Brien or Brady Martin, if he was still there when the time came, I think that might have been a little bit more trepidatious in terms of the way that people felt about it than ending up with one of the guys who was top 6. I can't be disappointed about a guy who every time I looked around was ranked basically 3rd or 4th in every rankings list that I saw. You can't be disappointed about that or about top line potential. In the moment, would I have probably taken Higgins? Yeah, I kind of agree with that, only because of the need, but you also don't draft for need. And that's the guy who's sitting there. The goal here, at least from my understanding, is, and this may change. Not may change, but this may not be the case when this season rolls around. But from my vantage point, this is the last time you're going to pick in this kind of spot. If the player falls to you that you feel like is pretty much just irresistible here, you can't pass up a possible top line talent in whatever way you feel that it's going to swing. You take the top line talent. Maybe in their minds, they don't see James Higgins either. There's two things. They either don't see James Higgins as a 1C going forward, or they don't see him as a center, and they see him as a long-term, maybe he moves to the wing eventually. And if that's the way that they view it, then there's probably no difference. And you're doing a, then it's an apples to apples comparison here, that it's two guys who could play on the top line. Which one do you like better? Clearly they liked the guy who has more size to his game. That's really what it came down to. Was I a huge fan of the Jack Nesbitt pick in the moment? No, I like the player. I'll start with that. I do like the player, and I think there's an upside to the player. Would he have been my pick at 12? No, but I also will add in that one of the things that this comes down to a lot is the idea of it. Sure, there's a lot of players who, when they're drafted on those draft nights, have center next to their name and ultimately end up playing on the wing in the long run. It doesn't amount to that. I think that Nesbitt probably is in a lot of people's eyes a top 10 center in this draft. If you look at guys who people actually think is going to stick to the position once you get to the NHL level, and that might top out at third line center as the ceiling for him, but at least it's a center. It's playing the center position, which they still needed to address. Some of the stuff I was seeing from his camp, encouraging. There's obviously work to do. He's not going to be somebody who we see at the NHL level in another year or two like Martone. I think he's going to be a minimum 3-year project, but I think you have time with some of the other guys that you've picked up and the money you have. You can always go and get another guy who can fill the third line center role. I mean, you did a pretty good piece of business with the Noah Cates contract to be able to potentially put him in that spot for the next 4 years. And maybe Nesbitt's the guy who falls in line after that contract is up, or by the time that contract is over. So I don't have a problem with that. I think the issue there is that, to me, if there's an issue with the Nesbitt pick, it comes down to, you wanted them to take Higgins and they didn't. You didn't like that they traded 2 first-round picks to go up there for that player who is clearly more of a project than maybe somebody like if we would have been talking reverse the picks here. They pick Higgins at 6 and they trade up to 12 and they go for a winger because Eklund's still there. That might have been the type of package that people were sitting there going, yeah, I can get excited about that because there's my first-line center and there's a guy who's got a lot of potential on the wing. Whereas I look at Martone and think about how close he could be to the NHL. I really believe he's playing NHL games in another year. That to me is much more substantial than wondering, I don't know if Higgins is playing, he's going to take a shot at playing NHL games as soon as this year, but is he going to go back? Is he going to be back in college by that point? Playing one more year at BC. Once he's done at BC, is he ready to make the jump to the NHL? Or are they going to look at him and say, no, and one AHL season is going to do you pretty good in this situation? So it becomes a longer timeline as well. And I think that after the Nesbitt pick, what they did in the second round, I really liked the second round picks. I really couldn't find fault with just about any of these, honestly. And seeing some of the footage of what was going on at development camp, I don't know how you can't get excited about those guys as value plays and filling some important roles. I certainly, I was a little bit surprised with who they went with first among those picks. I wasn't surprised I wasn't surprised by the name at all. I kind of had, from the beginning when I was writing up draft previews for who I kind of thought were targets, Carter Amico was a day 2 guy on my list from maybe early May, honestly. I'm talking, that was a guy who I saw where he was being ranked and the size of the defenseman. And it just seemed like a guy the Flyers were definitely going to be interested in. The fact that after they made that pick, though, to get Murtagh at 40, to get Vansagi at 48, I think those are 2 tremendous value picks. That those are I saw some of the stuff that Vansagi's doing. Vansagi's a tank. I mean, he's built so much for an NHL type of role. He's not gonna be there right away, but he's built for that. And I love the personality of some of these guys from the interviews I was seeing and things like that. This is a good crop of second round picks that all have potential in some capacity. And I think that, considering where they started the day, I equally thought it was a tidy piece of business to move back 2 spots to go back into the second round for a 4th time when everybody kind of thought that was out of the picture after the Zegras trade. I thought that was smart business as well. I don't focus in as much on the latter 3 picks just because by the time you get to the 5th round, you're taking a flyer on guys and you're seeing where it goes. But I thought really, Nesbitt's the one guy that really has to try to, that you hope pans out of that group, and everybody else, like Martone looks like he's meant to be an NHLer, and soon. He's got the leadership qualities. He's got the physical makeup to potentially, be there very soon. He just needs to maybe build it up a little bit more, but he's close. And then the 4 guys in the second round just all seem like guys that have some sort of potential role in the right situation for an NHL team, whether it's potentially reaching a ceiling of second line or being more the bottom 6 role. They all have what looks to be a good, solid role. And I love the fact that they picked guys who are immediately college bound, and we're going to see them not playing juniors, not play against guys in their own age brackets or younger. They're going to play against 21, 22-year-olds right away and get the sense of what it's like to play against that kind of competition. So I don't know where the big club goes this year just yet, because there's a lot of things we got to figure out once we see Rick Tockett's style and who makes it and how Zegras fits, how all the other newcomers fit and where they kind of piece that lineup together. But I think that in between all of that, whether this team is borderline playoffs or maybe makes a playoff run, or if they're back into the draft lottery for one more year while they kind of put the finishing touches on this or feel like they're putting the finishing touches, I think fans are going to have a really good time if they can find some of these games, BU and Michigan State and potentially, let's see if Penn State becomes a factor in this as well, with Martone or any location where Martone may go if he plays college. I think focusing on the college game is going to be like the next biggest thing for Flyers fans this season, beyond focusing on the big club. Because, and I would have thought, if you would have told me 2 weeks before the draft that would be the case, I would have said no way. I would have thought for sure that the Phantoms would be the next big ticket. It might be the college game now. It might be NCAA hockey that gets a lot of attention because the Flyers now have a crop of young players in that whole, in that whole realm of things that are going to potentially be looking to make an impact and take a big step.
Yeah, catch up with your Flow Hockey app for the Phantoms and your ESPN Plus to catch the NCAA. Yeah, Chef, you have a question?
I agree with Kevin on his assessment of the round 2 guys. I will say the one that stuck out, I was at camp on day 2. The one that stuck out the most to me was Murtaugh or Murtagh. How we pronounce it?
Yeah,
Murtagh.
Murtagh. Yeah, like the Murtagh repairman.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many good Lethal Weapon jokes if it's the other one, but he's too young for this. But okay, so he was great. I thought he there was checking. I'll tell you what, this camp, the guys weren't afraid to let's just say throw their weight around on anything, because there were checks delivered at who was it? Powell checked Nesbitt, and then Nesbitt came back and checked him the next day when he had the opportunity too. So the thing is this, with Nesbitt, I didn't realize how big he was until I saw him in person. And he's 6'5". They say he was 185. I'm not buying that. I think he's already put on more muscle. I think he's probably closer to 195 if that's the case, but he's already thick. He's already big. I wouldn't discount him out. Because he might not have had the skating ability yet, but he was when they were doing the drills and they were coming down to everything, he was in the right spots a lot of the time. You'd see they'd stop it and say no, and a lot of people were getting like, hey, look at this, look at that, and do this, do that. But with him, it was more like, okay, it was more encouraging because he was doing the right stuff. I have a lot of hope for him. I think he's gonna really pan out. Just based on what I saw one day at camp, obviously. But I think Danny might have stolen one here, because if a lot of people are complaining about trading up and losing a 31st to trade up, like you do that any day of the week. You trade 2 for 1 there. If you can get inside the top 15 to draft again the second time, then you do that, hands down. I thought it was ridiculous that I did see people complaining about it, then complain about the guy. Look, he was a top 20 guy on a lot of people's lists. And I do believe he was in Detroit's mirror, under their microscope, and Predators too as well. I think even the Preds say, "Oh, well, they kind of took our guy," But so I think don't count him out. He. The one thing this whole group of kids have is they're competitors, man. If you see them out there was nobody slacking on that. Even with the older picks that are carryovers that are coming back, nobody slacks. So I think the competition level with these kids is going to keep them hungry, and I think you'll see how good long-term. My first assessment of Nesbitt will be long-term. It's going to pan out. I think we're going to surprise a lot of people.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah. Look at these guys at Dev Camp, and I wasn't at Dev Camp, but I watched the All Philly podcast today. Charlie O'Connor was at all the days, and he had a lot of interesting insights. The one thing he said about Nesbitt was that he's not a guy that's ever going to pop in the drills, but when during the scrimmages, his hockey sense plays, and his compete plays, and his touch around the net plays. And he's a guy that I think is probably just going to get better and better if he can, add lower body strength and really improve his skating. He definitely looks to me like a guy who could be a 2C in the NHL. And then you mentioned that Shane Van Zage, who was one of my favorite guys in the draft and a target for them in the second round, that he's like a tank. Well, I think that his nickname during camp was Truck. And he had an absolute – there's a hit on Twitter, on X you can find, where one of the invitees tried to go at him in the corner, and Van Zage just obliterated the poor kid. Like, he threw a reverse check on this kid, and it was one of the hardest hits I've seen, and it was in development. Like, he is an absolute beast. I said from the start that his upside is Tom Wilson, and I still think that's the case. I mean, he's a lot of fun. And as Chef said, Murtag is a guy who he's got all those skills that pop in drills. He's a really good skater. He's a really good shooter. He can hit a little bit. It does seem like their draft was really good. And what Chef talked about, how these are all kids that can compete. That's what they went after. They went after big players who could compete, who also have skill to go with it. And even if only a few of these kids pan out like we think they might, it's going to be we're going to look back on this draft, I have a feeling, and this is when the Flyers kind of pivoted the direction that they were going, and they went from a team that had a lot of smaller guys. And I was at the town hall last year, and fans were asking them why they had so many small guys on the team, and they said they wanted to improve the size. Well, that's what they did, but they did it in a way that also adds skill with Martone and Nesbitt, and all these guys that they took. So yeah, it's exciting. I think this is the pivot that we're going to be seeing here.
Yeah, I really like Murtag. He's a really skilled guy, great shot, and he's put together. He's 6'1", he's 200. He's not quite as big as guys like Van Zage or Nesbitt or anything like that. But I would not be surprised if you look at like the first 6 picks, if 4 out of the 6 have some kind of significant NHL time and careers. And that would be a major hit for the Flyers. May not be at the level we want, but as long as they get more tone, and then the rest of them maybe are third line, fourth line, that's pretty good as these drafts go. And anything out of like Westergaard, Luswick, or Nathan Quinn, that's just cherry on top. So the Flyers scouting staff looks like they really did a pretty good job, at least in mining through this particular draft. However, the AV staff could use some help. And if you saw the early, the only thing I can think of, I mean, this is something like if I had an old VHS tape from the 80s and I left it in a car and it got, melted and all that, I tried to stick it in a machine. Those are the images we got from scrimmage yesterday. And it was really a joke. And I don't know if they need better Wi-Fi or boosters or what have you, but, $1 billion corporation, Comcast, do better. Chef?
Well, yeah, you would expect the streaming company and a cable magnet that you figured that they would do something, but here they were left, in the ashes by the 1969 moon landing. And, there was a better feed in 1969 on the moon than we got from Voorhees that day. I'll just say that. And I'm incredibly shocked that the company that, I guess we should be happy because you could have waited 2 to 5 hours in order to get the feed if it was a regular Comcast company. So there.
Yeah, I guess that was pretty awful. So if we look at the lineup, Kevin, are they done? Are they going to pull a surprise, like an offer sheet, or are they going to make a trade that maybe we didn't see coming? Just a gut feeling, because nobody's got any real information right now.
I mean, gut feeling, they're done. That said, when it comes to that type of stuff, Danny Briere is as close to the vest as anybody. So if they've got anything up their sleeves with it, it's kind of like they've always told us. If you're not going to know about it until we tell you it's happened. That kind of thing. I don't see them doing anything else. To me, this morning, my preparation for coming on with you guys this morning was it's pretty much Cam York and that's it. Right. And then the piece of business with York was done. And it's, I kind of sit back and I go, that's pretty much it. As far as I can tell you now, you wait for the internal competition, the internal competition for those roster spots. You wait to see what the outlook is on Forster coming into training camp versus right now. You look for, all of that basically. Does that mean that they're totally done? It doesn't mean that they couldn't pull a fast one on everybody, but I certainly don't think it's in the offer sheet realm only because I just don't know where they would fit that kind of money. It's very easy to see the path to bringing guys up from competition and how you can swap out guys on, holding roster spots now, versus guys who may be in October, right? Like if Bump's not given a roster spot right now toward the cap, which Puck PD was back and forth on this all day. He was in a spot, then he wasn't in a spot. So I think there's a better chance he's in one of the spots when the time comes, but the Fedotov shoe has to drop at some point. That there may be another, are they going to carry 8 defensemen or are they going to send one of those guys down to open up some of that space? There are ways that they can still navigate the cap situation and come in where they want to be, but they can't do too much. And, now that we, like I kind of said it from the top, now that we know the number for Cam York and how it fits, that's what I think makes this all make sense. They filled every spot pretty much. I mean, if you can go into the season and Forster's actually healthy and able to start the season on time, what do they have? One wing spot that they don't have totally accounted for because it's Delorier or, young prospect getting a shot. That's pretty much the only question mark at this point. You've got your goaltending situation at least sorted out to start the season. You know who the 2 guys are going to be there. You've got your blue line sorted out now with the York contract done, and really forward is pretty close to being solved, except for, whether or not Forster's able to start on time. That's pretty much it. And, that's why I'm saying I really come away from this feeling like, is it still an incomplete for the whole rebuild as a whole? Absolutely. But I can see how the stage is now set. You've navigated that one final offseason where there's dead cap on the books. You've navigated that one final offseason where there may be guys under contract that you've got to see through to the end. You're getting very close. I mean, pretty much at this point, they're going to go into next offseason where the only person that they have to account for is Ryan Ellis. That's about I think it's the only guy I can find who has to be accounted for one more year, and everything else is gone. No buyouts, no retention. It would all be gone. And you get the cap boost as well, as it goes up again. They've got a lot to play with, and that's where I think that they've set themselves up really well. It just comes down to whether or not what they hope is available is there when the time comes.
Yeah, gotcha, Dan.
So I looked at it today to see what's coming off next season, because I've been so impressed with Danny's creativity that I'm like, all right, let's give this man some real money to play with. So next off season, the following contracts expire: Rodrigo Abels, Nicholas Delorier, Trevor Zegras, Christian Dvorak, Bobby Brink, Jamie Drysdale, Noah Juleson, Dennis Gilbert, Zamula, Andre, Urson, Fedotov. You've got Kevin Hayes' $3.5 million is going to come off. Cam Atkinson's 1.8 million is going to come off. Scott Lawton's 1.5 million is going to come off. They're going to have literally zero buyout or retained money. They're going to have $34 million coming off the cap next offseason. Additionally, the cap is supposed to go up by $8.5 million. So you're looking at a scenario where the Flyers may have 41, 42 million. And let's assume that the only guys that might make big money, Zegras could have a big year, Drysdale, who knows, Brink, and Urson. Really, there's 4 guys, and you don't even really know how any of those guys are going to perform this year. So they're going to have a ton of cap space. So my pipe dream, which I put out there today, was, all right, let's win the lottery. We get McKenna. And then, we've been talking about Connor McDavid. Obviously, it's probably likely that he re-signs in Edmonton, I would think. But plan B, look at the RFAs next offseason. Now, it's obviously, again, this is a pipe dream, right? But you've got Connor Bedard is an RFA. You've got Leo Carlson is an RFA, and Adam Fantilli are all RFAs. Now, could you imagine? I mean, the Flyers need to get that 1C. Like, could you maybe you offer Fantilli some insane contract that Columbus probably matches, right? But you never know. So that's my pipe dream. You're going to have about 42 million next offseason. Let's make it happen some way. And look, even if that doesn't happen, you got to know that they'll be able to maybe try and trade for someone. I mean, they're going to have so much cap space. I just can't wait to see what Danny can do with that.
Well, I think the question, Kevin, is will the extra cap space lead to an era of players getting re-signed? And we just went through a real dud of a July 1st. Now, that was an attempt that Florida is going to the final, three years in a row, and they want to keep the band together. Mm-hmm. No tax state. A lot of things are aligning very well for them to sign all these guys. But they weren't the only ones. So, I mean, outside of the Marner thing, which is, again, had its own little quirks in terms of what type of situation it was. And there's probably some tampering there, and you had the blackmail.
There's always tampering, though, guys. We all know this, though. But there.
Yes. But that's the concern I have when you think of it as a scenario that Dan kind of envisioned. It's like the Flyers are going to need either a 1D or a 1C via trade or UFA signing. I don't see how they're going to get. They're going to have to draft one of them, but at the very least, you would think they'd have to trade or overpay for one of them too.
Yeah, probably. I can see how that is, and I'm not gonna look past when it comes to that RFA list next year. I'm not gonna look past some of the defensemen that are on that list too. Mm-hmm. And look, do I think that Lane Hutson's making it anywhere past away from Montreal? No, I don't. But I do look at teams that I think could be in more of a cap crunch, and like Thomas Harley intrigues me as a defenseman, and he's an RFA next year. And Dallas may not have as much space to work with as other teams do, at least. And maybe you could jump on that opportunity potentially. Who knows? More likely, though, it is going to have to be. The one thing that concerns me about Danny Briere going into next offseason would be just to kind of not resist the temptation, because it's not really a temptation thing, but this has you're kind of hitting that point where kind of things started to go sideways for Ron Hextall when you get to that point, because Hextall was doing all the drafting. Everybody loved his draft classes. He was doing all that type of stuff. It seemed right. And then they all of a sudden got to one particular offseason. It wasn't exactly the most attractive free agent class, and they handed 5 years to James Van Riemsdyk in a down year and a high price tag. They can't do that. They cannot make a signing where it's a guy who is not going to be over the top, take your team to the next level, just be another one of these guys who plays somewhere in the middle at that kind of price tag and term, and then basically handcuff yourself again. That's what everything has been about to this point, is getting out of the mess in the first place. That, to what Dan was talking about, all of the things that come off the books. I look at the guys that they might try, the RFAs, and that they might, and any UFAs if they do that, but more the RFAs, your Zegras, Drysdale, Erson, those guys. I look at the money they're going to get back on the cap from Atkinson and Hayes and Lawton and view that as the money they're going to eventually use to put on top of the contracts that those guys already have. That's what you're using to account for the raise between that and what the cap goes up by. Everything else that they have from guys coming off the books, though, is what kind of should be poured into the upgrades, the potential for making upgrades on either the UFA market, the RFA market, whatever it may be from other teams or in the trade market. Maybe you're in a position where you're looking at some of these, I wouldn't want it to be this case, because then you're talking about guys who are 1 year removed from a draft, but you never know. Somebody who you just picked could be somebody who's on the market if that's what gets you the 1C that you've been searching for a long time, or the 1D that you've been searching for a long time. Who knows? But, I wouldn't jump in like that. I think the whole plan has been, look at the money that we're going to have when 26 rolls around. We're going to be ready to do something. You'll have the means to do it for sure. You'll have the financial means. So, I've been playing along with the pipe dream. I know what everybody would love to see. Everybody let's put it this way, people are already putting a nickname on it. They want the 3M line. They want Martone, McDavid, Michkov. That's what people would love to see. But
that sounds like Dan's line.
But, if that's the thing, if it ever got there, if somehow or other McDavid made it to market and you've got all this money, you do have the ability to make an offer that maybe he can't refuse. And if that's the case, then maybe you can pour everything into that, especially if you've got enough of these young guys who are still on entry-level deals. That's why I think it's been so important. Think about it from Alex Bump's perspective here. You don't often hear of guys who come in, have the opportunity to just, hey, you could have made your NHL debut in the final game 82 of the regular season. Devin Kaplan chose that route. He wanted the entry-level deal immediately so he could play in the NHL for one game first. Alex Bump said, I'd rather have the AHL time, be in a playoff race, play more meaningful games, and save that year. Yeah, that's just such a mature approach to, I'd rather save the year, because not only does it help him in the long run, but it can help the team in the long run because it keeps everything down. I don't know what Bump's expectations would be if he made the NHL, but you got to figure with what he was able to do in college, he's probably a double-digit goal scorer pretty much out of the gate.
A third line was scoring.
Typical third line. Think Scott Lawton's numbers, at least in the very beginning. Think something along those lines. If that's the case, how much further can he take it once he's 24, 25? And you're still potentially paying that guy on a lower scale because of everything. That to me would be pretty substantial if you're able to do that and bridge that gap with younger guys while you have the money to go out and basically try to snag the big fish.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we have a comment from one of our fans, Chris Mack, and one part of his pipe dream includes either Kaprizov or Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes, it's like I think the whole city of Vancouver would burn down if they let him go. And he more likely would go to New Jersey. But Kaprizov, it's not crazy. Dan, he was a guy that you had spoke about his potential that Kaprizov? The Flyers would go after. Yeah, in the past.
I don't know. I feel like he's not exactly what they need to be spending a ton of money on, unless they can find a center elsewhere, just because, I just think they need to be focusing on that hunt for a 1C. But look, Kaprizov's fantastic, and having him on the same power play as Michkov would be pretty dynamic. But I wouldn't argue with it, but I would rather have a big center that we know can, just be plugged in at the 1C. But yeah, Kaprizov, I wouldn't argue with it.
No, it's going to be interesting. Like Kevin said, how are they going to get these players? And it's going to be, that's really the toughest part of his job. They just missed out on Dickinson by one pick. I think that could have been possibly your 1D. And the season he had afterwards in London makes people think, hey, you know what? There was your 1D right there. I don't know. We'll see. So the only other piece of business, Kevin, is just waiting to find out the official announcement maybe coming about John Snowden. Is he the one that's favored to get the Lehigh Valley job. And I think that's more important. Like you were talking about earlier, we're going to be watching a lot of Phantoms hockey with possibly Bump, but definitely Barkey, and more than likely Oliver Bonk being there. So
yeah, he seems like the favorite at this point. I think you're just waiting at this point. I don't know if there's much of a search left. He was part of the development camp staff. So, among the whole host of ex-Flyers that were on the ice all at the same time, Patrick Sharp, John LeClaire, Wayne Simmons, obviously Riley Armstrong's the guy who's kind of running the whole show there, but Snowden's part of that group that goes out there. And to me, that position's not about necessarily name recognition or anything like that. Because I know for a little while there was talk about whether maybe Jay McKee might get the job and go from Brantford to the AHL and go from coaching the OHL. That seemed like a possibility at the time. It doesn't seem like that's where it's going to go. It's not about name recognition for me. It's about alignment with the current head coach at the NHL level. That's what you want to see more than anything. I think it's already, I don't really anticipate there being anything that gets in the way of that with this, at this point. I think that that's part of the reason why they made that change in the first place. You could have just kept rolling forward with Ian LaPerriere if you really wanted to out of that situation. There was no reason that you had to make a change there. But I think that once they came to the realization that there was going to be a change at the NHL level, I think that that's what fell into place there. So I think to me, that's what's important, is having that alignment across both leagues here, both levels, so that players who do make the transition from the AHL to the NHL are more prepared for what Rick Tocchet wants to do. And I think you're going to have a lot of guys who are in that next tier getting close that, let's just say there's a lot of guys who they just brought in fairly recently that come from the college ranks that we're going to bring some of that size aspect and some of that maturity in there. Like, I don't have, at least as of today, camp can always change things, but I don't have Devin Kaplan on the Flyers roster day one. I don't have Carson Dorwart on the NHL roster on day one. Those are guys who did play a little bit at the NHL level at the end of last year that I think go to the minors and are kind of part of your next in line. Like I immediately look at those two guys and think there's your Lixell replacement, right? Like there's the guy who's kind of waiting in the wings. We need a guy to come up for a couple games. That's who I think you're going to do that with. And that's just, and I'm like, right now, that's just strictly at the forward group. Then you got a whole group of defensemen that are also there. I know they talk up Hunter McDonald a lot. I would put, I have a feeling Emil Andre's starting at the AHL level based on the way this is going. I have a feeling one of the two guys they just signed isn't making the team and will be the veteran down there, kind of, be in that role. You got Helga Grans down there, who I think, with that NHL time is a short-term option. Adam Jennings down there still. Like, you got a lot of guys who are right on the cusp of it that you can call upon when needed. And that's what's interesting about the Phantoms to me going forward, is that it's going to be this mix of, there are a few new faces that go in from the college ranks, and maybe a guy that you do sign that's waiting in the wings. Like, one of the free agents we didn't really talk much about was Lane Peterson. He's probably one of those guys who's waiting in the wings right down there at the AHL level and getting ready to go. So if needed. So you got that too. And then you got the group of defensemen as well. Probably the most fascinating thing about that team might be the goaltending, right? Like, your chance to see Bjarnason play pro level for the first time extensively, and then whoever backs him up or whoever is playing over him at the start of the season, or however we want to look at it, because it sure seems like it's going to be Fedotov, but we don't know the answer and the end result to the Kolosov thing once again. So we're still on that as well, until there's a resolution. But at least it feels like now, like, I can kind of tolerate the Kolosov situation when it's more AHL centric than it is lingering at the NHL level. I feel like we go into this now knowing who the two NHL guys are, and really that's all you can ask for at the start of the year, is that we won't be kind of playing musical goalies for the first 3 months of the season to figure out who the backup is and who's not and all that. Who the two guys are, and that's encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the last one from me. Chef, what you got?
So, obviously with what the Flyers didn't re-sign, Wisdom, Desnoyers, a decent amount of Phantoms. They had this new crop coming in. Now, they were kind of they did make the playoffs, and they think they surprised with one round last year. How better does this make the Phantoms with these influx of these guys? We don't know what they can do as a team. but it would be nice to see Fedotov get steady AHL minutes, like split the time with him and Bjornsson, and just see what, like, get it done the right way. We know we had flashes of good, really good stretches. It's just, and it all falls apart because the basics fall to the side when you're on the road and you're in a season because you haven't, you just, I guess you don't get the muscle memory and all that stuff. But with these other kids coming in, how hot a ticket is the Phantoms going to be? And obviously that fares well for the parent club too, the Flyers, because you got all these young whippersnappers on your heels of your skates trying to steal your job. So obviously, Briere has set a theme, and it's actually bled down to the Phantoms too, it looks like.
Yeah, and see, to me, when I was just talking about the forward group and guys like that, I focused in on like the college guys who just got signed and go in there. I left out probably the two biggest names that are joining the Phantoms because they're going pro, and that's Denver Barkey and Oliver Bonk. Like, those are the two guys to me that people are going to flock to see because they know that they're that they're really highly touted within the organization. And it's interesting to me, because one of the things that we talk about with Martone being the pick that they made in the first round, not too often you see guys who are his age, who haven't been drafted yet, who are a captain in the OHL. I thought it was a standout thing for Denver Barkey to be the captain of the London Knights when you have all the guys that they had on that roster that eventually goes on to win the Memorial Cup. That says something to me about the quality of the player and what people think of him. And you add in all of those aspects of it, and it's going to be an interesting young team that has a lot of growing to do, and that goes back to the initial question about the coaching decision. It's you need to make sure that the right guys are in place, because it's far less about there's a handful of guys, like as I scroll through, and like I mentioned, Lane Peterson, who they just signed, that's one guy who's definitely more on the veteran side. They still have Anthony Richard under contract too, and he'll be one of those veteran guys who's a step below also. But most of the guys that we're talking about here are 24 and under, and that's what's encouraging. You have those guys who are looking to take the next step and looking to build towards an NHL career eventually, but it's got to start somewhere. And I mean, even down to Bjarnason turning pro, it's like you've got something at every position. You've got one of the top two, I would say, at every position turning pro. Bonk's one of the top two defensive prospects in the system. Bjarnason's one of the top two goaltending prospects in the system. They're all part of this equation. So it becomes that much more interesting. And I know that people want that to eventually be the NHL club, right? Like that you can't turn away from the team, from the Flyers themselves, because they're that good. But while you're still trying to put the finishing touches on the rebuild, knowing that those guys are just maybe one step below, whether it's the AHL or to a degree the college ranks with all these guys they just picked, you've got so many different ways to see these guys. And I think it's important that they're all relatively kind of close like that. Like, can you imagine, like in the hypothetical, can you imagine if Martone does choose Penn State and continues his career there for at least the next year, goes to college? How many people can easily make a trip and go to State College to watch a Penn State game to see Martone, or then go to Allentown and watch all of these guys and be able to do this? It's going to be like, these are going to be hot tickets for the next wave if you're really invested in that side of it. And while you're waiting for it, and then it's not like, whether Martone makes it or doesn't, it's not like you're devoid of high-end talent now at the NHL level. The Zegras trade brought something else to that alongside of Michkov, and you hope that there's guys that take that next step as well. So there's a lot of promise right now, and it's really all lining up exactly the way that I feel like I saw it a year ago, that 26 was the big off season to maybe put the finishing touches on this thing. And it still feels very much that way. I don't know how good of a team they're going to be this year, specifically at the NHL level, but it feels like there's one more off season of this, and it's go time, and it's time to make it all happen. And Danny Briere has, at least what he's done for the time being, is set himself up for that. And, once you get past next off season, I think that's when the questions will start to surface, whether or not it's good enough. But for now, you're on the right path. You're setting yourself up for it. And it's just about whether or not it crosses the finish line the way that you intend it to, which maybe is that big name free agent that's going to be out there that you can use to cap it all off.
Yeah. That's. I mean, we wanted incremental improvement. I would say with the Zegras trade and some of the ads, they did that. It was a little bit underwhelming in goal, but who was it that? I think it was Kevin Curtis was talking about Marty Biron, and when they asked him of the goaltenders that were available, in free agency, Jake Allen was the best, but Marty Biron said that Vladar is probably the second best in his estimation in terms of what was available out there. So we'll have our fingers crossed. Yeah.
I'll go off of Dan's point from way back, kind of earlier in the show. But I don't know how many people are out there watching Calgary Flames games over the course of a time. I'm one of those people because that's just what I do. I watch a lot of other teams as well as the team I cover. But I felt like every time I watched and he was in goal, wasn't necessarily, the numbers don't necessarily reflect it, but it wasn't a bad performance. And when you start to add up league averages of goals against average and save percentage, he was above average in both of those categories. Even if it wasn't the most impressive numbers, he was still above average in those two areas. So that's why it's a step in the right direction. I think it's going to have the potential to surprise people because it'll be better than what they had. Like if anything, it should be just make it eye-opening of how poor it was beyond when Sam Ersson was on, that you had what you had, that Fedotov was what he was and Kolosov was what he was. And you're at least going to get something that I think has way more stability than what you had in the past. It's certainly the past 2 seasons in particular.
Yeah, particularly since Hart left, really. I mean, that's what it's been.
Yeah.
So, like I said, that was the last one from me. If you guys have any more for Kevin, we'll.
Dan, you good? I'm good.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
We'll let you get back to the family. And
it would not specifically for Kevin, but I see people on it's the big joke is the Flyers are always 2 to 3 years away, and I understand why people think that, but you really can see them sort of building towards next off season. Is this season Rick Tockett's going to come in, figure out what's what. They probably wouldn't mind having a shot at Gavin McKenna. I think if you asked Danny Briere in a locker room to, injected him with the truth serum, I'm sure they wouldn't mind having one last shot at the lottery and then go at it next off season and really hit the accelerator. So I know people always joke about that 2 to 3 years away, but I think this time next year, I think we're going to be looking at something very different.
Well, and I'll add into what Dan was saying, because when you think about, okay, maybe it's not the most, overwhelming and, with what they did in free agency. It's not guys that jump off the page at you that are going to be top line roles or anything like that. It was what we should have expected. If you expected anything different, you really weren't paying attention to where they were probably going to take this with the short-term deals and stopgaps. That's what it was all about for this offseason. What I come away with from that, though, is that because they didn't make that much incremental improvement, like they made some improvement, certainly the Zegras trade is the big one. Like that's the one I think that blows everything else out of the water in terms of you don't expect to add that piece. The opportunity arises. You take the chance every single time on a 24-year-old who's going to be part of your team, maybe for the next 5 years beyond the season that you have him for. That's the chance you take every single time. What I look at, though, is that to Dan's point is if they feel like they can get into the lottery, I know everybody's kind of obsessed with Gavin McKenna. There's names right after McKenna that if you're in the same range one more time that they were this year, you've got a great shot at getting something. And let's not gloss over the fact that McKenna's primarily a left winger, so you're still not necessarily getting your number one center just because you get Gavin McKenna. That's but you might have somebody who rises to that level if you picked 3 or 4 and somebody else is there that. Maybe by getting some lottery luck in that sense, or something of the sort. So, one more year where you may not be the playoff team, where you may have to think about a top 10 pick one more time, may not be the worst thing in the world, because I think that the way that draft is starting to stack up, there's not only is there some really talented players that are going to be in that top 10, but there's a lot of guys when you look at some of the centers or defensemen in that draft, which is really the 2 areas that are big focuses. They fit the mold of exactly what they started to do at this year's draft. They're big guys. There's a lot of big centers and big defensemen that are part of that class. And I can totally see the Flyers being invested in, maybe if it comes to it, one more year of that, and we get the one cornerstone piece that we need at one of those key positions and move forward, full speed ahead back into relevance and back into the playoff picture, because that's exactly where they want it to go.
Yeah, who's like Dan? You would know the name Volkamp. He's like 6'4", right hand shot. He's going to college or something like that.
I honestly haven't done enough work on next year's draft yet, so I don't know the name, but I do know that at this point it's supposed to be a pretty good draft. So
yeah, there's some kid by something like that name. I said, oh, he's got a Flyer written all over him. But we're getting carried away here.
What's the over under of Darth Ladar? T-shirts and black and orange instead of Darth Vader. He's got orange highlights. I can just see it. This stuff writes itself with this fan base.
Well, the Flyers the Flyers do a Star Wars night, and he
exactly.
already has been monikered as Darth Vader along the way at various stops in his career. So I think the Bruins did a Star Wars night just focused on him. So he's got some potential.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Well, the new standard is 900. So if he can do 900, he'll blow away what we had with Kolosov and Fedotov, and I'm here for it.
Yeah.
So
that was exactly my point. He was an 898 last year. Like, you're right there.
Yeah, right there. Kevin, we just want to thank you so much for coming by, taking the time out tonight. What can you tell the folks about where you're going to be? I know you mentioned earlier you're writing a piece, and where can you find that for?
Yep. So 97.3 ESPN.com, sportstalkphilly.com, YWT podcast, all that stuff. The same as you read off at the top. That's where everything is, and probably gonna get some time off now, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of orders of business left at this point. So we'll get a little bit of time off. I guess sit back and wait for the schedule to come out. That's about all that's left.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we hope to have you on again down the road, of course, and maybe the Flyers will pull a surprise on us. We'll have you back sooner than we think. But either way, it's great having you on every time we do.
Some guys. My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. You take care now.
You got it, guys. Thanks.
Right. Bye-bye. Okay. So any other thoughts before we call it a night? Maybe you have some last thoughts, Shep. Maybe I'll start with you.
I'll say this. Everybody who keeps pining for that top pick in the draft, or one or two, just remember, we got a one or a two in Mitchkoff when it happened. It just happened. The circumstances were right. It fell to us. We got a possible, top 4 or 5 guy in what we got this year with Martone. So don't look at it like we're we lost everything. Oh, we didn't get one. These guys are going to play a lot better than where they were drafted at. Let's just say, that's my opinion. If you want to argue with me about it, especially the 100 some people that might be watching right now, text me or DM me or whatever, or just X at me or whatever we're calling it. I'm at Chef the Left B on Twitter, Chef to the Left B on Twitter or X or whatever.
You got it. Yeah, we're at we got our number right now is 287, but people follow us. The great thing is it'll be posted on X and Facebook, and we'll get those numbers up, and we appreciate it. Dan, last words here.
No, my last word is thanks to everyone who tuned in. We're just starting this live stream stuff, so that's a really good number, and I love interacting with people on all the socials, and it's very nice people to tune in to watch us talk about the Flyers. So thank you all.
Yeah, absolutely. And our buddy Chris Mack, there's a center, and I'm going to screw this name up, a Russian center, Foya Borov. I guess we're going to have to look that one up after tonight. And he's probably in the draft next year. We'll take a look at that. We'll keep a note of that. So, Chris, thanks for your comments. And we're going to have many more coming up with the show. And, of course, the audio version will be available. You can follow us, like I said earlier, on X at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. Same thing with Blue Sky. We're also on Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And you can follow us on the following podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, and of course we're on YouTube or Facebook, where we're streaming tonight, and YouTube hopefully next time. Just type in there O&B Puckcast, we should pop right up. If you could follow or subscribe on one of these platforms, get us on your notifications. It really helps move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast. And we really do appreciate it. So thanks for joining us tonight on the stream, or if you're listening on audio, we really do appreciate it. And until next time, everybody, which we're taking a couple weeks off, and maybe we'll have a show for you by the end of July, unless Danny pulls a surprise. But barring that, a couple weeks from now, you take care.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.